Every year, the iPhone's camera gets better and better. It's about time that Apple added more megapixels to its camera, as its competitors have already had higher megapixels. For me and for many others, what's important is how good is the camera, because that's what we carry around in our pockets most of the time. And it's also the camera that we take out to shoot some photos when we see something interesting. All the cameras have better low light performance as compared to the previous models. Last year's iPhone 13 models introduced cinematic mode and ProRes video recording. Now, cinematic mode was only available in 30 frames per second and in 1080p. This year on the iPhone 14 series, cinematic mode has 4K and 24 and 30 frames per second options. Now, when it comes to recording in ProRes, you want to get an iPhone that has 256GB and above, because last year I made the mistake of buying 128GB as I have a 2TB family plan of cloud storage. So I didn't think I need 256. When I wanted to record in ProRes, it could only record in 1080p. So this year I got the 256GB and it records ProRes in 4K. For those of you who don't know, ProRes is a codec that you can easily edit with major editing softwares as compared to MP4. However, ProRes uses up a lot of storage. This video right now is also being recorded in cinematic mode. Most of my YouTube videos are filmed using an iPhone, whether it was the 12, 13, or 14 Pro Max. I've also used it for certain professional events. I usually do photographs and drone, but sometimes my clients ask me to do some behind the scenes video recording, and since I didn't have a professional camera, I would only use my iPhone and record it using HDR. What I was most excited about is the 48 megapixel photos and action mode. Now, action mode, you can only record in 2.7K. However, this is a game changer for those of us who like to film while jogging or certain vlogs that require you to do some action. Now let's start with photos. Here are some of the photos I took with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now I'm going to zoom in using Lightroom to check the details in the 12 megapixel and the 48 megapixel RAW files to see the difference. Cinematic mode is an interesting mode where you are able to blur the background and keep your subject in focus. And if you have subjects moving by, or if you're moving or transitioning from one subject to the other, it does shift focus and it looks pretty nice. In my opinion, I think it does a pretty good job at nailing the focus, and you can change the f-stop to increase or decrease the amount of blur in your video. And let's say, for example, if you record a certain video and you want to change the depth of field in post, you can always go to your Photos app and then hit edit and choose to either increase or decrease your depth of field. I also tested out how good the focus is in cinematic mode by just keeping it and recording random strangers pass by and seeing how the focus locks on and what happens. I ran across the field twice chasing my brother, recording it in normal mode and then also recording it in action mode, and here is the difference. Recording it in action mode was pretty good. It did a pretty good job at keeping the footage stable. So for those of you who are into action vlogging or do whatever kinds of action and you're using your iPhone to record it, keeping it in action mode is pretty awesome, but just keep in mind that it only records in 2.7K. Now there's a 0.5, 1, 2, and a 3 times zoom. Now the 2 times zoom is just cropping in to the main camera. Personally, I don't use the telecamera as much. My go-to is usually the main camera and the wide angle camera. The wide angle camera is about 13 millimeters equivalent, while the main camera is 24 millimeters equivalent compared to last year's 26 millimeters. Now something I was hoping that they were added in this year's iPhone was 4K slow motion. We've always had 1080p for slow motion, and yet again this year we have 1080p when it comes to 120 and 200 frames per second slow motion. Every year as smartphone cameras get better, they close that gap between smartphones and professional cameras. What we carry around in our pockets is just so incredibly powerful these days, and you can get some incredible looking photos and videos just by what you're carrying in your pockets. I really like cinematic mode, but it's not perfect. Sometimes the blur in the background looks a little unnatural. Now also something when you're shooting with photos, I've noticed that the photos are a little too sharp for my taste. It's just something that, you know, has a lot of computational stuff going on in the background. Now, for my taste, that sharpness is a little too much. Everyone has their own taste for them. You know, they might probably like it, but me, I don't really like that extra sharp touch. Even the JPEG photos that come straight out of the iPhone 14 Pro is pretty good. So is the 48 megapixel and the action mode enough to convince you to upgrade from last year's iPhone 13? That's something entirely up to you. Is that something you really require? Higher megapixels don't necessarily mean better photos. Higher megapixels allow you to crop in more so you don't lose that quality and maintain more detail in your photos. However, shooting with higher megapixel photos in low light situations is not too nice. You'd want to shoot in a lower megapixel. So if I were using my iPhone to shoot raw photos when there's low light in the evenings or at night, I would switch to 12 megapixel raw. But in the day when it's pretty bright out, I would definitely switch to the 48 megapixel. Did those photos look like something that was shot out of a professional camera? Let me know down in the comments below. Now I'm working on a separate video where I do some street photography using the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on that video. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you're interested in watching my review of the GoPro Hero 11 Black, make sure to watch this video here.
Always on never change.